I'll start by creating a folder in my desktop. So I'm gonna right click, new folder, and I'm gonna name it as Schedule App SpecklePy. And let's start Visual Studio Codes. Let me get that from the other screen. And I'm gonna add that folder into my Visual Studio Code, like so. Okay, so let's add a new file into this folder, and I'm gonna name it as main.py. So now we can start by importing libraries. So libraries. Okay, so I'm gonna start with Streamlit. Let me type in like so, and importing Streamlit is easy. Import Streamlit as st. I'm gonna continue with pandas, same thing. Import pandas as PD. So the important part is SpecklePy stuff. So from SpecklePy, we're going to import a couple of things. First, we are going to import wrapper, and I'm going to explain what that is in a second. So from SpecklePy.api.wrapper import stream wrapper. So stream wrapper gives you some handy helpers to deal with URLs and get authenticated clients and transports from your default manager. So if you installed the Speckle manager and edit your account, the stream wrapper will make things really easy for us. So from SpecklePy, we have imported stream wrapper. Let's continue with Speckle client. From SpecklePy.api.client, let's import Speckle client. So what is a client? Speckle client is our entry point for interacting with the Speckle server's GraphQL API, so we can actually receive commits and get stuff from Speckle server. And finally, we are going to import operations. Let's do that. So from SpecklePy.api, let's import operations. So what is operations? Operations is where the actual sending and receiving is happening. So we can actually receive the data inside of a commit using operations.receive. All right, so this was the libraries. Let me actually save this, and I'm going to right click on main.py and open it in integrated terminal. So let's start our Streamlit app. How do we do that? First, type in Streamlit and then run, and finally name of your library. In this case, it's main.py. I think it's opening. Okay, here it is. So since we only imported libraries, we're not seeing anything, but if you take a look at the bottom, you can see that it says made with Streamlit. Let me actually open the original app as well, so we can actually see what we're gonna do. So here it is, schedule app. So let's get started. First, I'm gonna start by creating the containers for our app. So we have three areas. The first one is the header area, where the title of the app as well as the description is going in. And in the next step, I'm gonna create another container where I will put all the input stuff. And finally, we will have our output area, right? So let's do that in Streamlit. I'm gonna type in containers, and let's add a emoji just to make it more readable. So let's start with the first container. I'm gonna name it as header, and I'm gonna type in st.container. Next is the input area. So I'm gonna type in input equals st.container. So, and finally, we will have our output area. I'm gonna name that as data st.container. So we have the containers ready. Let's continue with the header. I'm gonna type in header, and first I have to reference to this container. So everything I put in under that will be contained in this container. So I'm gonna type in with header, and then let's add a title. To add a title, I simply type in st.title and then the title of our app. In this case, it's going to be schedule app. So I'm gonna do Control S to save. And if you take a look at the top right corner, I have this always rerun thing. So I'm gonna click on that. So we have our app title here. I'm just going to add an emoji to make it more visual friendly. And here it is, schedule app. Let's continue with the app description. So it's going to be a st.info because we're giving info about our app. And let's type in SpecklePy exercise for creating the schedules of the future. Awesome. So the header area is ready now. Let's continue with the inputs. So for inputs, we're going to create 3 inputs area. The first one is the commit URL. So users will copy the URL of their commit and paste that into here. So this is a simple text input. Let's create that. First, again, I have to reference the container. So I'm going to type in input and let's reference that using a with. So I'm going to type in with input and then let's start by creating first the subheader, st.subheader, and this is the inputs area. So in here, first I'll need a text input. I'm going to type in st.textInput, and it asks for a label. What's the label of that? So this is going to be the commit URL. And we need a default value. I'm going to copy. Let me go to my Speckle server. And I actually recently created a sample stream for that, SpecklePy schedule app. And let's examine what that looks like. So right now I only made 2 commits. The first one only contains rooms just to make the receiving process easy. And the second commit I made contains a couple walls and rooms. So first I'm going to copy the first one and get its link from here. And let's paste that as the default value. I'm going to click on save. And let's go back to our app now. So as you can see, the default value for the commit URL is the value we put in right here. Okay, so now I'm going to create another variable that will store whatever users will input into this area. And I'm going to name that as commit_URL. So we can actually reference what users inputted in the later stages. All right. So we have the URL ready. And now what do we need to do? First, we need to get the Speckle client to receive actual data from Speckle, right? And if you remember, I talked about a thing called stream wrapper in the first section, and it makes, the client and authentication process really easy. So we are going to use that in this section. So let's do that. I'm going to type in wrapper and let's start with getting the wrapper. I'm going to create a new variable and name that as wrapper. And here, let's reference the stream wrapper. And if you take a look at it, it asks for a URL. And we already created a variable for that called commit URL. Let's put that into here, commit_URL. So now our wrapper is ready. So what is the next step? Next, we need to get a client to interact with the Speckle server. Let's do that, client. So I'm going to create a new variable again called client. So as I said, wrapper makes things really easy for us. So using the wrapper, I can get a authenticate client really easy. Let's do that. So first I need to reference this wrapper variable. I'm going to type in wrapper and then .get client. Just like so, I have an authenticated client. Just make sure that you have the Speckle manager installed and you have an account in that manager, because Stream Wrapper is using that in the background to get an authenticated client as well as a transport. And speaking of transport, next thing we're going to do is get a transport. Let's do that. I'm going to type in transport and let's create a new variable called transport. So again, we are going to reference wrapper dot get transport. And just like so, we have an authenticated transport. Awesome. So all the infrastructure is ready. Now we can get this commit object from Speckle. Let's do that. So commit. All right, so let's get Speckle commit. First, I'm going to start by creating a variable called commit so we can reference that commit in the later stages. And let's get the commit using client. If you watched the first tutorial, you know that it's really easy to get a Speckle commit using client. So we can use client dot commit dot get. And then it asks for two things. First, the stream ID and then the commit ID. And again, this is where the wrapper becomes really handy, because using that, we can get the stream ID as well as the commit ID really easy. Just type in wrapper.stream ID. Just like so, you have your stream ID. Same thing is true for commit ID. Just type in wrapper.commit ID. All right, so just like so, we have our commit object ready. Let's write that in the web page. I'm going to type in commit and click on Ctrl S. And this is what the commit object look like. So if you take a look at its properties, you can actually see that it has an attribute called referenced object. So the commit object and the actual data inside of it are two separate things. To get access to the data inside of a commit, we need to get the referenced object from it. Let's do that. I'm going to create, so let's say get object from commit. Actually, we're going to get the object ID. And I'm going to create a new variable called object ID. And let's get the referenced object from this commit. Simply type in commit.referenced object. Just like so, you have the object ID of this commit. All right, so we've talked about the commit and the data inside of a commit being two separate things. So in this part, we can actually get access to the data inside of a commit. How can I do that? Okay, so I'm going to type in receive object from commit. And I'm going to create a new variable called commit data. And this is the part where we are going to use the operations. So let's type in operations dot receive, and then it asks for object ID, which is right here. So I can simply put that in there. And then it asks for a transport, which is right here. So I can say transport, and just like that, we get the commit data. Let's write that in the Streamlit app to see what it looks like. So if you take a look at it, what we received from this commit is another base object, right? And this is actually where we can go to the Speckle server, and let's open that exact commit and examine it here. So if you go to the top left corner, you have expand data view option, right? And so this base object has its own attributes as well, such as ID, Speckle type, application ID, children count, and rooms. So how can I get the actual object from this commit data? So if you hover over the categories from Revit, you can see that it says at rooms right here. So these are actually dictionaries. So I can create a new variable called rooms, right? And then I can say commit data, square brackets, and then type in at rooms, So if I save this and type in the variable name again, we are going to see all the rooms in our model just like so. Again, these are base objects. So we can use the same structure the square brackets and then name of the variable to access whatever data we need in our model. So this is the basic interaction with the Speckle server. So they are basically dictionaries with special attributes. So this is the basic, workflow to interact and get data from Speckle server. All right, so we have the commit data stored in the commit data variable, but what do we need now? So let's go back to our original app. And if you take a look at it, we have another input, and this is a drop-down menu where all the Revit categories will be listed. So in this case, I somehow need to get the category names from a commit. What are the categories? In this case, it is rooms. So base object has a special method for that called get dynamic member names. Let's do that. So I will say categories equals to commit data dot get dynamic member names. And then I'm going to type in categories one more time just to see it in our Streamlit app. And here we go, rooms. What about the other commit? Let's take a look at it here. So it's right here. This one has more than one category in it, rooms and walls. I'm going to copy the URL again, paste that to our app, press enter, and now my list have two elements in it, walls and rooms. So the get dynamic member names is working as we want it. So now let's create the other input. What was it? This drop-down menu. Again, we're going to reference the input container with inputs, and this time we're going to create a select box. Select box, and label is select category. Okay, so what are the options? Options are commit data dot get dynamic member names. So I'm going to save it. Let me delete this part, and here it is. So we created this drop-down menu with the Revit category names in it. So I'm going to store this in another variable called selected category, just so I can reference that in the later stages. All right, so the first input is ready. The first input is the commit URL input. And once the user inputs the commit URL, I have a drop-down menu where the categories related to that commit is listed. And the next input is actually the parameters input. So all the parameters related to this category will be listed in this menu. And this is a special menu, actually. So users can actually select multiple things like level, name, and number, and so on. So first I need to get access to the parameters inside of rooms. How can I do that? So I'm going to create another variable called parameters, and let me go to Speckle server and let's examine our data one more time. So I'm going to go back to the original commit. And again, expand data view. So let's go into rooms, and I'm going to get into the first object. So the first object, or one of the rooms basically, has a couple attributes, and one of them is parameters. So inside of these parameters, I have all the parameters related to that room. So let's get access to the parameters object, just like we did with a commit object. Let's do that. So again, we are going to reference to the commit data first. So commit data, and then from commit data, I want to get into the rooms. Let's do that manually for now. And I'm gonna save this. Let's go back to our app and let's write parameters so we can see what that variable looks like. So commit data at rooms lists all the rooms. So I want to get into the first object for now. Let me save that. And this is what that looks like. It's another base object. So from this object, I want to get access to the parameters. So I'm going to type in parameters, save. Let's go back to our app. Now parameters is another object. So what do we need to do? We need to get all these dictionaries from this parameters object. And we can do the same method as we did in the category list or category dropdown. And we can use the get underscore dynamic member names and save. Let's go back to our app. And now all those dictionaries or parameters are listed with their names. So, but right now it is only getting access to the rooms, and I'm going to replace that with my selected category variable. So let me remove this and type in selected category, save one more time. So now I've selected walls and the parameters of walls are listed. Let me switch that to rooms, and parameters related to rooms are listed now. Just for the sake of demo, I can actually create a similar input as the third one in this app as well. How can I do that? So again, we're going to reference the input container with input. Then I'm going to say st dot, I think it was called multi-select, right? It asks for a label, select parameters. And then what are the options? Options are parameters. So I'm going to type in parameters, Control S. So we have this drop-down menu. But right now, the names of the parameters are the equivalent of them in the Revit's API. But I want to get the actual name, like for the height, for the room underscore height, it's height, or room underscore area, I want to get the area. So we need to get the parameter names from the parameters object. Let's do that now. So I'm gonna comment out this part for now. And let's get the parameter names. So I'm gonna create a new variable called parameter names, and it's gonna be equal to an empty list, right? So we can loop through each parameter inside of this list. So I can say for parameter in parameters, and then for each parameter, I can get its name attribute. Let me show what it looks like in the Speckle viewer. So let's go to room name, right? So if I expand this object, it has an attribute called name, and it actually stores the actual name of this parameter. Same thing is true for room area. Let me show you that. So room area name equals to area. So what are we going to do now? So we're going to say commit underscore data square brackets. Again, we're going to reference the selected category. And then for now, I'm going to get the first object, parameters, and from the parameters, since we're looping through each parameter, we're going to reference to this guy. So I will say parameter, and then we are going to return its name, right? And we are going to append this name into the parameter names list. So I'm going to say parameter underscore names dot append, and then put this in a brackets. Let's save this and let's go back to our app, and I'm going to type in parameter names just to see what that looks like, and voila. So now we have the actual name of each of those parameter objects listed here. And let's sort them by their names. So I'm going to say sorted parameter names. Let's save that And let's see parameter names one more time, and voila, just like that we have our parameter names listed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function so we can use this in our codes more easily. Let's do that. I will say def get parameter names, and then it's going to ask for a single input, the commit data, and it's going to also ask for the selected category. And let me copy this part. So first we are going to say parameters equals to, let me actually delete this and copy this part. So parameters equals to this one, right? And then I'm gonna copy this part, parameter names, blah, blah, blah. And let's do the indentation. And in the end, we are going to return parameter names. So let me copy all definition and let's add that right before containers. So we have our functions in here. I'm going to click on save one more time. Let me delete this part because now we have a function just for that. And now we can actually create the last input as well. So let me delete this, guys. So instead of parameters, now we're going to reference to that function called get parameter names. What are the inputs? It asks for commit data. So commit data equals to commit data, and selected category equals to selected category. So if I save it now, and now I have a better drop down. Let me type in level, name, all right, so it's working. But now we have another issue, because every time I make a change in this input, the whole script reruns from scratch. So how do we solve that? We can solve that with a form. Let me create a form now. So I'll create a form equals to st.form. And what does it ask for? It asks for a key. And I will say parameter, maybe inputs. So this is our form. So again, just like containers, I can also reference this form. So I can say with form and indent that into this form. And I'm going to click on save. And it gave me an error because it is missing a submit button. So each form has to have a submit button. Let's do that. So I'll create a new variable called run button. And it's going to be st.form submit button run. So just like so, now we have a button that says run. And now since this multi-select is in a form now, it will only run once the run button is clicked. Let me show you what that looks like. So I can say level, name, nothing is running as you can see. I can do area, number, whatever, but it will run once I click on this run button, just like so. Okay, so in this part, we have created the three inputs. We have created the commit URL, the selected category, and select parameters multi-select. So in the next section, we are actually going to show the data and create that download CSV button. Okay, see you in the next one.